it was in the late 90s, the governor of Texas held a series of citizen juries into the deliberative poll. These randomly selected Texans were asked, if you had to pay just a little more for your electricity bill in order for it to be renewable energy and not coal-driven energy, 54% of people said yes. After having been through the process of the citizen jury, just talking among themselves and about the problems and hearing from experts and disagreeing with each other and compromising and coming out, 82% of people said that that would be an okay thing to do.
Wow.
They suddenly realise, oh, I'm in a democracy. Oh, I'm in a community. I think that the problem is that we speak as if there are these things going on and the ones that will work will scale, and nothing scales. Nothing ever scales. It doesn't scale here and it doesn't scale anywhere else. Hello and welcome to another edition of Uncomfortable Collisions with Reality. This is a bit unusual. The person I'm with is Chris Vanstone from the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. And he approached me a week or so ago and said, could he interview me about my vision or whatever you want to call it for the future? And I said I'd be very happy to do that. Now, the background is that I chaired the Centre for Social Innovation for 6 years from 2009 till, well, the end of 2009, 2010 till 2016. So I've got a kind of lively interest in what TACSI is up to and how it sees the future, and am pleased that it has some interest in how I see the future. But as you'll find out as we go through this discussion, I think, I then cavilled at some of the questions Chris said he was going to ask me. And I said if he was happy for that to happen, then I'd be very happy to try to make myself as articulate as I can. So with that, I will hand over to Chris Vanstone, a remarkable and positive person. In fact, I will just mention that one of the secret ingredients for TACSI, which is the name that Philip Adams gave, he was the first chair and then ran away at short notice. And he called it TACSI, and that's the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. And that stuck. And we were looking around. This was just before I arrived, but people were looking around, and we recruited Chris and Sarah, and they were, I think, participating at Participal, a consultancy in the UK that was looking at co-design and all kinds of things like that. And that was a very important thing that we did, and a very successful thing we did, I think. And so there you are. That's my introduction to Chris Vanstone, but then he gets a little bit of a chance to say anything more he wants to say, and then we'll get stuck into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this we've been talking to people around Australia to try and understand, I guess, to try and stretch our own imaginations as to what the future might be, or what directions we might go into as an organisation, but more broadly in the social sector, the social purpose sector in Australia. What are some of the things that we could or should be thinking about for the future and planning for? Quite funnily, one person we were speaking to said, you should really speak to this guy, Nick Gruen. Now, he probably would never have heard of anything like TACSI, but I reckon you should reach out to him. So that's what we've done.
Well, here I am. And tell me, what is TACSI? Yeah, go on.
That's right. So TACSI is the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. We work a lot with government and with philanthropy and with for-purpose business and with not-for-profits. And sort of core to what we do, I guess, is a sort of participatory design process. So we work with people who are, you might call the intended beneficiaries of work, but kind of real people who should be benefiting from strategies and policies and services, and sort of try and create spaces where professionals of different kinds or professional expertise can come together with lived experience and can come together with practice expertise to develop new services and policies and systems and strategies. So that's sort of one way to tell the story of what we do. But at the same time, we recognise, one thing that's happening is more and more people are doing that, and we're wondering what might be next on our horizon, and how might we grow and extend and plan for the future. And yeah, that's the sort of question back to you, I guess, Nicholas. But with wanting to focus in on a couple of areas that you thought deeply about, and I don't know how you'd narrow that down, but what are a few topics that we could focus in on in this session?
So I think there are two things that I would pick, and I think the one that we should go directly onto is what I think is the next question, because when I got to TACSI, I would have called myself a tragic liberal. And what I mean by a tragic liberal is someone who believes that social disadvantage is a very real and entrenched thing, and we should be generous in the way in which we try to help people suffering from disadvantage, and often that disadvantage is deep-seated and multi-generational, but that we shouldn't, of course we can be hopeful, we shouldn't be too fatalistic, but that in fact, if we are realistic, we actually won't have a very large impact. We can, obviously, basic welfare dollars makes a large impact between starvation and crime and being able to live, so that's a large impact. Beyond that, if we find families and communities in dysfunction, how much do we know about how to fix that? And I arrived at TACSI believing that that was a very uphill struggle, and seeing the way TACSI worked, seeing some of the things that we did, and as Chris knows, I constantly go on about Family by Family, a particular program that we built, not because I think it's the beginning and the end of the world, but it's a very concrete thing you can point to and say, this sort of thing is the sort of thing that can make a difference. And I have little doubt that that type of activity makes it can have very visceral power. I see the world as having two pretty immovable objects. One is multi-generational entrenched disadvantage, and the other is people's desire to live better lives. And in many ways, it's a little bit like us being on a psychiatrist's couch. Most people want better lives, but then they also want their second choice as well. And you get to that stage where you say, well, yes, Doc, I want to change. And then the question is, well, how much do you want to change? What are you prepared to give up in order to change? And in any event, having seen this program, I thought this is terrific. I felt great about being part of the organisation. Very privileged, because here I was really only there because I was an economist who people knew wasn't just a straight dollars and cents economist, but I was sort of there because people think economists are more serious than social workers, which is absurd, but there you are. It's a kind of unstated status structure in our society. And it was a wonderful thing to see. And since being there, I think that the problem is that we speak as if there are these things going on, and the ones that will work will scale, and nothing scales. Nothing ever scales. It doesn't scale here, and it doesn't scale anywhere else. By it doesn't scale, I don't mean this program doesn't scale in that it couldn't scale. I mean that it's just too much. It's too much of a multidimensionally difficult problem for the system to scale it, and it doesn't scale. And it doesn't actually, apart from its fantasies that it's somehow going to scale things when they work, because it's always telling it, this is in the background of almost everyone, almost all the time. There's this thing in the background that we're trying different things. It's just a bit like a market. No, it's not a perfect market. We know that. But when something works, we'll double down on it. Well, no, you won't. And it's obvious you haven't. And that's true in every other country in the world. And so that is the problem. And no one will look it in the eye, and no one will get down and dirty with it in the way that we got down and dirty with the families. To actually try to understand the nuts and bolts of why it's so hard, and then to try to build some hacks, some strategies to just loosen up the joints a bit and keep working, and, try to make this system, which will not work, if we don't try to make it work, that's the big thing that we need to be able to do, I think.
Wow. And what are some of your ideas for making progress on that?
Well, my ideas are, as I said, they're ethnographic ideas, except I'm not using the word. That's the closest word I've got to what I want to do. And what I mean by that is I don't want people to go clambering around government and with notepads and stuff. I want people to think about what happens inside government departments, what happens in ministers' offices, what matters to them when push comes to shove, and then to realise that in properly understanding all of those things, they have seen the contours of the problem. Mm-hmm. So one of the problems is that we have a system that cannot tell the truth to itself. Right. We have a system that constantly spins to itself. That is a very deep problem. I like to quote Richard Feynman, the great he was a nuclear scientist, but the great Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who said, in science, you must not fool yourself and you are the easiest person to fool. And, well, what we have in any large organisation is a highly articulated system for fooling yourself, a system for telling nice stories to the outside about yourself, a system for telling nice stories to yourself about yourself. And so it was starting to think about that and other things in large-scale systems like Toyota production system, a bunch of ideas like that I cooked up the thing which I call the Evaluator General. And the Evaluator General tries to build a system that tells itself the truth by creating a structural separation between knowing and doing. So if you're a school teacher and you want to teach better or you want to understand a problem, you bring in some resources from someone who has knowledge about evaluation and stuff like that. They're a bit of an expert in that area, but they have an independent reporting function. So they collaborate with you, but they report to somebody else whose job it is to tell the system the truth about itself. Now, in some ways, I've been persuaded that I'm wrong. In some ways, I've been persuaded in some work I did with Prime Minister and Cabinet that I'm having a lend of myself that you can ever build something independent inside government. Right. And so, but what I was reaching for is this independent. So I did understand that you need to build, that's why I called it the Evaluator General. It would be a bit like the Auditor General. It's supposed to have that independence. But I'm still persuaded that I'm wrong and that a better strategy is to try to think about how you embed some of that truth-telling, some of that accountability for knowing what's happening, accountability for evaluation in the community, in the beneficiary community. Right. But that's problematic too. Right. But I'm only mentioning those things by way of illustration. Yeah. Just as I might mention by way of illustration that in Family by Family, the family seeking help choose actively as part of the choice of choosing the mentor family. If you just say that to someone, especially if they're an economist, they'll think, oh, that's choice, that's freedom of choice. We're building a market in family services. Well, no, you're not. But it is illustrating a point about integrity, autonomy, agency. It's giving you a hint of what's needed and how unbelievably far from what is needed the scaled systems we have are. So these are these meaty issues, and as I've seen it, we've actually made large steps at the periphery of the system, but people have satisfied themselves with lots of pleasant rhetoric about their own tasks, and then there's this other task which is climbing a bigger mountain, in fact. And we don't talk about it much. We have critical discussion of it. We say, isn't it bad? And we have lots and lots, way too much discussion about how that's linear and we're complexity people. I mean, please. That's a complex system too, trust me. But it's a system that needs proper understanding from its point of view. And I don't think we've got very far. And once we even start that process, then we've got all the persuading to do and all the power that sits there. But we actually haven't done what we can do to articulate the problem to ourselves and back to the system. We've satisfied ourselves with things which are now increasingly cliches, I think.
And how does, one way to think about this sort of challenge we experience in scaling things, if you think about what we're doing as sort of a kind of social research and development work, like we have research and development systems in medicine. That's why we got the COVID vaccine so quickly and of course in all sorts of industries. But is what you're saying, and government plays in that to some extent, but is what we're talking about here fundamentally different because we're sort of looking at social outcomes? Or
it is fundamentally different because, I mean, it's a perfectly good analogy to start with, just like my evaluator general is a good thing to say at the outset. But no, it doesn't work because Pfizer wants to produce a vaccine. That vaccine sits outside Pfizer. If Pfizer can jump through the hoops and get the vaccine done, you can criticize the hoops and so on, but that's quite different to whoever delivers this system to help. It's a social system itself. And so we're trying to develop something inside that system. And so it's a different thing. It's just the very beginning. It's perfectly good rhetoric, if I can use that word, for you guys to talk about yourself as the R&D lab. I think that's fine. That's right. But I think you should be a more pissed off R&D lab and say, hey, what is your problem? Why is it that you're not trying to learn more from us? Because here's the work, and it's pretty good work. And why has it made so little impact? And how do we get to talk about that?
Right.
It's got you going.
And then are you saying that the solution? So there's this sort of agitation from outside, sort of being the more pissed off R&D lab. I like that idea. But then are we trying to? What is the kind of constructive change on the inside that might lead to?
Do you mean the inside of government?
Yeah.
I think about it. It's a perfectly good way to think about it, but it can't change unless there's some comprehension of what the problem is. And I think there's almost no comprehension anywhere of what the problem is. The way I've tried to, let me take you through a story which starts to get you to where I think the problem is, or at least it's one conceptualization, one crystallization of the problem. So I was, someone read a whole lot of stuff I wrote about well-being, and it was pretty. You can read the articles. There are 3 articles on the Mandarin which I've written on well-being. Anyone who's interested can email me and I'll send them the links. And it was pretty. I'm not very impressed with all the waffle about well-being. It seems to me there are some important crunchy things that the well-being agenda gives us the pretext to do some exciting and new things, and we should seize that rather than waffle on and end up with endless well-being frameworks and all that sort of stuff. And I remember talking to a state treasury who'd got itself interested in this, and I said to them, I said, look, think about 3 things that you can do that are low cost and that could really you can sort of feel inside your bones that they would make a big impact on well-being. And I gave them the example. And again, it's sort of, it wasn't that TACSI introduced me to this work. It's just that TACSI actually has a product in that area, and that is carer loneliness, okay? The social isolation of senior carers. Now, for crying out loud, how much money does it cost to have proper programs to help connect them up? Australian policy actually led the world in trying to keep people at home rather than ship them off to aged care homes, and they have a program. I used to know the acronym, but since they've changed it anyway, there's not much point in knowing it.
Oh, is it HACS?
HACC. That's right. What's that stand for?
Oh.
Anyway, it's a meat and potatoes program. It's very simple. People come round and they do someone will come round. I was going to say a woman, doesn't have to be a woman, it usually is. And they come round and they say, how are you, Mrs. Gruen, as they said to my mother, and they might do the wash up, help them cook a bit, and off they go to the next person. It's kind of social contact, and also it's looking out, are they okay? Have they had there's some of these people might fall, and if nobody goes and knocks on their door, no one knows for 3 days. So it's just a sort of an obvious thing that you should do. And we, I believe, were one of the leaders in doing this. And of course, we can do much better than that. And your Weavers program is the sort of thing that can do this at a social level and Dom Campbell's casserole program in the UK. And, this isn't hard. Now, that was an example that I gave, and I can think, that better teaching of dyslexic kids is going to improve well-being, and it's going to be negative cost. Is that easy? I think quite a bit of it is easy-ish. Some of it is not. Anyway, so then they said to me, yeah, well, look, this is all very well, but we need a framework. Our politicians, we've been told that we need a framework. Yeah. Our senior managers, our politicians are going to produce a framework. I said, good, I'll give you a framework. It's called a cost curve. Okay, that's your framework. Find things at the bottom of the cost curve and start doing them. And then you can build a framework that's actually got some ground truthing in it, that's got some actual content in it, as you move up the cost curve, as you understand these things. So why am I telling you this? So lurking in that story is what I call the institutional imperative. And the institutional imperative is that an institution has to have outputs. It has to do things. And so in the institution of the Treasury of a state government, it has a treasurer, and the treasurer is part of a government, and the governments say things. And governments say, we're going to do X and we're going to do Y. And for reasons to do as much with fashion as anything else, well-being is one of the things that politicians and senior managers say. 10 years ago, they said resilience. Now they say well-being. That is an opportunity to do something. Uh-huh. And so institutional imperatives are generated out of that speech, out of that claim to want to be doing something. And I call them an imperative because my message is not, just ignore all that and do the right thing. It is to take note of that, but not to lose sight of what it might be there for, which is for people's well-being, not for the framework. And yet the process of the framework pushes out the actual substance. And so in some other consulting to a government department that was in the process of transforming its services from administering special entitlements to trying to do so within a well-being lens, if you like. So we're continuing to administer those entitlements, but we're trying to do them in such a way as to maximise the well-being of our target group. They said to me, would I do some work for them? Firstly, they said, has anyone else written articles like that on well-being? And I said, no, they haven't, not that I know of. So they said, rightio, can you write us a report? And I said, no, I can't write you a report. It's all out there in public. Can you... but what I will do is I'll be a critical friend. So I will come to meetings, and you can put me in your email paper trail, and I'll contribute. And so I would go to these meetings, and after a while, people would, I sort of got people's trust. And I remember one meeting where I said nothing at all. And at the end of the meeting, somebody said, well, we should ask Nicholas what he thinks. What did you make of this meeting? And I said, how many times did people talk about their well-being framework? 20 times. How many times did people talk about the well-being of one of the people whose job it is this agency has to improve.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And so I said, your task is not to throw away the framework. I mean, I think the framework you're working on is the wrong framework in a million ways, but it's you have a deliverable and it's a fucking framework, so you've got to deliver it. And while you're delivering it, don't forget about the people you're really trying to serve. Try to keep so your task is to actually use this as a vehicle for doing what it claims to be doing, and not to lose sight of that. And so on and so forth. That's a small example, but it's but every institution has institutional imperatives, and because they're imperatives, you have to work with them. And the task is to align the imperatives insofar as they can be aligned, and usually in a decent democratic country to a substantial extent, but they're not the same thing. They never are exactly the same thing, just like a report is not its outcome. That you are trying to keep them together. And I don't see very much of that at all.
In your in other brilliant podcasts in this series, you talk about fidelity. It sounds like that's sort of connected to what you're talking about here.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to write. I wrote an essay that was far too long to publish as an essay, and so it's being turned into a book as we speak, about a philosopher of science called Michael Polanyi, and he was a neoliberal, like people like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, but his paradigm of a free order was not the market where the whole business is everyone for themselves, subject to a set of rules which are enforced from outside, but science as a free order, science as an order in which everyone does what they want to do. And he called that a fiduciary order. Right. A fiduciary order. And where Karl Popper talked about the open society where anyone, so freedom of speech, anyone can say anything, blah, and blah, and blah. Well, it seemed like a good idea until all of a sudden we're in the post-truth era, and we missed something out. And what we missed out is fidelity. Right. And his idea is that no society can be free without close fidelity to our shared interests, our shared destiny, and so on. So, yes, absolutely.
What would a national fidelity project look like? I was trying to imagine, how would you actually go about...
Well, you wouldn't. This is a very interesting question. You can't build a national fidelity project. This is like lists of values, a particular... I used to just hate them, but not say very much about them. But now I'm quite open about saying they're just rubbish. And you might have a list of values in your organisation. Lots of people do. And they're complete rubbish, because values are demonstrated implicitly in choices. They're not written up on a board. If I'm honest with you, I'm not honest with you about all things. Any value is a situated value. So I can't give you a national fidelity project, but I can try. My evaluator general was a first cut at a fidelity at a targeted bit of fidelity, a bit of an incompetent one, as it turns out. But it was an attempt to try to solve that problem in a specific and therefore ground truth way, not in a waffle way.
Yeah. So to do it, we'd have to be thinking about what are the mechanisms or approaches that could kind of hold us to fidelity in different contexts and different spaces.
Well, fidelity is about us holding ourselves faithful. It doesn't work. It's not really fidelity if somebody else is holding us to it, you see. And our entire system is a system of simulation. This is the problem. I feel that very strongly, but I don't have a therefore the answer. The answer, what we've pulled apart is a mechanism that evolved over. It wasn't a perfect mechanism, and it evolved over hundreds of years, and it evolved in different ways in different places. But the idea of fidelity, that's floating around. That floats around among younger people when they want to. Many of them want to work in high status areas, but then they realize it's just about making money and they think that's not enough for them. So they're getting the first glimmerings of some kind of urge to fidelity, if you like. But anyway, I'm waffling a bit. There you are. There's my first objection to a question. There are plenty more where that comes from. A national fidelity policy.
My question is really, what should we do about it? Like, this is clearly important to you.
So pick something somewhere. Pick something somewhere and work out its relevance to you, and then something that you can do about it, and with some other people. And that's in a way, that's all I'm saying. But I'm also making a big claim that this thing has been subject to some very powerful corrosion over the last generation or so.
Yeah. But there's a kind of aspect in all of this, like there's a deep kind of, you might laugh at my words, but not laugh, but disagree with them. But like there's a deep kind of self inner thing to this, right? There's like, it's philosophical. It's like, how do I hold myself true? It's like there's something about the kind of cutting through all of this stuff involves us to be, I don't know if it's a different kind of person, but sort of hold a certain set of principles.
And I think, look, I mean, now we're really wading into very deep water, which was too deep for me, above my pay grade. But I mean, let me just tell you something that's happened during my lifetime, which is that we tried to make explicit things that can't be made explicit, like values, for instance. And so the answer to these sorts of questions for me, my answer to these questions is a retreat into a certain kind of humility. It's not at all pious, if you like. It's not, I don't want to be moralized to anyone, and it's not an abstract thing. It's just a concrete thing. It's a Saint Teresa of the Little Way thing. I don't even know who she was, but I think she's the woman who taught, not Mother Teresa, but little Saint Teresa from maybe the 19th century, and I may have that totally wrong. But, she talked about the taking pride and pleasure in the way you sweep or whatever.
Right.
The fabric of our lives depends on these things, and they slowly get corroded away on away days where you start talking about your vision and your values and your mission and because that isn't how you do things, because the way you do things is to start from this life world where a whole lot of things are tacitly built in and functioning. And then you identify a thing that you want to work on.
Well, surely there's something. That makes some sense. But Saint Little Teresa presumably sort of had those values inculcated in her, or those sort of, there's something about I don't know. Like, I think if I used to work a lot with my father, who's does lots of things, but is partly a builder and carpenter, and like there's a real sense of kind of what's good craft, and I think like the importance of jointing wood well or doing a good job, and like that stuff kind of inculcated in me from an early age. You can critique whether I'm still holding true to that, but that sort of stuff. That, I mean, I think for me, when I think about fidelity, that comes from some of that time, very like early childhood stuff.
But let me. So since all this seems so modest, let me say that modest things don't have to have modest impacts. Now, with our own individual example, that is almost invariably modest, although it is with one's children and with people who can see one, and that has some impact. But you asked me about two things, and this other thing is about democracy, and it gives me a way to illustrate what I'm talking about, because the place where this damage is most visible, I think, is in politics and public life generally, and that includes the public life of large corporations, small corporations. And I happen to think that quite a small hack in fact, a sort of universe of hacks which are part of a different way to think about representing people and a different way to think about paying attention to their thoughts, could have a very powerful impact in precisely the sort of way that we've been skirting around or swimming around, wandering around in the quicksand. And that is that there are two ways to represent the people in politics, and we have doubled down on one, and that is elections. And if you add elections to our media, you end up where we are, and that's not a very happy place. And then we have this other institution which also represents the people, which is a jury in a court case. And it represents the people in every bit as credible a way as elections represent the people, but completely differently in every possible way. And one of the things about that is that a jury is a modest institution. The people in it, by and large, are modest. They're Machiavelli, who is, traduced as an evil character because of the word Machiavellian, but he was the theorist, the first sort of modern theorist of politics, and he used to say, and his view was, he wasn't a Democrat, but then no one was a Democrat in those days. But he used to say that you didn't have to worry about ordinary people because they just want to lead their lives as decently as they can. You have to worry about the grandi. Who are the grandi? The people who are ambitious, the people who are wealthy, the people who've already got advantage because they are insatiable. They never have enough. There's never enough for them. And so that is just one way in which a jury embodies a quite different lived value system than a competitive electoral system. Another way in which it does it is that it refers us all to our fellows all the time. If I go into an election, I can be what's the word I'm reaching for? I can be fooled into thinking that the election's really about me. If I'm persuaded that, well, if I'm going to vote against people like Andrew Bolt, if I'm persuaded that there's a whole lot of people out there like Andrew Bolt, then I'm going to make it about me because I don't want them to win the election. I don't want my government to represent their views, or Donald Trump, for instance, which is quite different to, and I just want to make it clear, that's very different to lots of people who might think of themselves to the right of centre. I'm not really trying to make a left-right. I'm not really trying to make a left-right point there. But if I'm discombobulated by the process enough to buy the idea that there are these people out there who wish me no good, I'm going to try to use that election I'm going to contract. I'm going to try and use that election to look after myself because they're coming after my tax dollars, or they're going to want to indoctrinate my kid, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But if I'm with 20 people from my local neighbourhood, or I'm the person from my local neighbourhood and I meet someone from a local neighbourhood in Sydney and Charters Towers and Alice Springs and Adelaide and Brisbane, the vibe is completely different. To give you an idea, to give you an example, and again to try to escape from what might seem like the partisan prison I've built for myself, in the year... Well, it must have been the year before 2000, but yeah, so it was in the late 90s. The governor of Texas held a series of citizen juries, if you like. They were slightly different and called deliberative polling. But anyway, they're like citizen juries, groups of people sitting around being given social dilemmas that politicians have to solve and asked how you're going to solve these things. Now, this was convened by George W. Bush, the governor of Texas. And it was convened because he wanted to push Texas's energy system a bit more towards renewables and stuff like that. This was back when George Bush called himself a compassionate conservative. And he held these citizen juries in Texas on on the on energy issues. Going into the citizen jury, going into the deliberative poll, these randomly selected Texans were asked, if you had to pay just a little more for your electricity bill in order for it to be renewable energy and not coal-driven energy or oil, gas-driven energy and polluting energy, would you be okay with that? 54% of people said yes. After having been through the process of the citizen jury, just talking among themselves and about the problems and hearing from experts and disagreeing with each other and compromising and coming out, 82% of people said that would be an okay thing to do.
Wow.
So the framing of they suddenly realise, oh, I'm in a democracy. Oh, I'm in a community. That's the political side of it. Anyway, let's talk. Maybe we can talk more about that, and then I'd like to also get back to the managerial side of it. What might those kinds of ideas, what mileage might they have for some of the kinds of tasks you guys are working on and for organisations more generally?
Yeah, I mean, because we've seen I think just a fair amount of experimentation with citizens' juries here in Australia. What would you like to see happening next?
Oh well. What we've had is we've had citizen juries that have been, and great credit to the New Democracy Foundation and TACSI and Democracy Co and Mosaic and a bunch of, and I've forgotten one or two of the others, but lots of people have been active in doing this and they've done a great job. But all these citizen juries are special purpose, temporary citizen juries, which then end up in the position of that character from Oliver Twist who says, please, sir, can I have some more?
Right.
They go up to government and say, these are our recommendations, please implement them. And so what I want to do is I want that whole movement to transition, as it is starting to do, into, I want it to crystallise its ambition into a single kind of apex ambit claim, which shouldn't be an ambit. It's the claim. It's not an ambit claim. A single apex purpose. No, purpose is wrong. Milestone. A thing it wants is a standing citizen assembly.
Right.
I don't even care if it doesn't have that much power, because I think that as we saw swings in opinion, as I've just illustrated to you, and just by the way, when they held a citizen assembly in London on Brexit with a 48-52 split in favour of Brexit, it swung by the end of 4 days of deliberation 60-40 against Brexit. Okay.
Wow.
Now, as I don't know about the British Parliament, but even the British Parliament, which is essentially unicameral with some people with nice costumes as the upper house, and they make much better speeches and they actually know something. But anyway, the House of Commons is the one that runs the show. Even there, it was actually quite hard for the government to get through what it was trying to get through. And certainly in Australia, we have a Senate which governments very rarely have a majority in. Now, as a Senate watches a group of citizens go from what usually starts off sort of roughly in the middle, and as they consider it, they go in one direction, that will have a lot of influence, and it will also help to prove up and normalise this form of governance. And then at that point, people can say, actually, the people who run our electoral matters, and there happen to be three of them. One of them turns out to be my brother, somewhat to his surprise. He's the Australian statistician. He runs the ABS, and he's one of the people who is the commissioner who determines electoral boundaries.
Right.
And in Australia, it's done perfectly well, but in America, it's not. And in Australia, any government can disregard basic convention sufficiently to start corrupting that process. And the evidence is that a citizen assembly would not corrupt the process. And I can give you an absolute killer fact. I'll give you a killer fact on this. In the US gerrymanders used to favour the Democrats, particularly in the South, and they now overwhelmingly favour the Republicans. So Republicans are busy gerrymandering their electorates in all directions, and presumably to some extent the Democrats are elsewhere. But if you poll Democratic voters, 92% of them are against gerrymandering, and guess what the figure is for Republicans? 88%. It's easily enough. They're not in favour. So Republican voters are not in favour of gerrymanders. The people, that's Machiavelli's rule, that people are fine. They understand what the public interest is. But if you send a seasoned and optimised competitor into that system, they think, well, look, what I want is in favour of the public interest, and I just need a little help to win the election. So this is again. So you can see that the idea, the hack, is a modest thing. It's already something we've got, which is random selection. But there's nothing modest about where it might end up and the degree to which it might heal the gaping wounds that our politics has.
Am I right in thinking there's a standing citizens' jury now in Brussels?
No, I'm not sure about Brussels. I've heard a little bit about Brussels, but there has now been for 4 or more years in East Belgium, the German-speaking part of Belgium. There has been a standing citizen council, and what happens is that I think it is of 50 people, and people are rotated onto it. I'm not sure how long they're there for, 6 months or a year. They're paid for their attendance, and they also have the power to convene another, and they're a general purpose citizen council, and they can sort of say whatever they want, and they can. I think they may even have some discovery powers and things, but they're not conceived of in an adversarial way. But they are part of the process of government. They have no executive power over or legislative power directly, but they also have convening power, and they have the power to to identify the terms of reference for another random 50 people to study a particular subject.
Huh.
So it's quite remarkable, the things. So I think they got going in 2019, and the first thing they wanted to study on? The working conditions in aged care homes.
Right.
One of the studies they did was one of the things I've just mentioned, which is teaching in schools for everyone, not just for the people who fit the model.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that will include disabled people, which no doubt is a politically incorrect term, differently abled people and dyslexic people who I don't think of as disabled, particularly they're differently abled. And then there's been another one on housing. These are the things that, with the thaw going on in Australian politics, turn out to be the things that really matter.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's remarkable. I've talked to people in Belgium about this, and the way I see a citizen jury is as a check and a balance to politicians, and they don't like that framing at all. But then that citizen assembly or that citizen council came into existence. Firstly, they're represented by proportional representation, which produces a very different political system, not necessarily superior in all respects, but all 6 parties in East Belgium voted for this citizen council.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So our politicians say they're in favour of this stuff, but that's in general.
Yeah.
Not in particular.
Yeah.
So I maintain my rage, my sense that the community needs to take some of the first steps, because while there are well-meaning politicians, that well-meaningness never gets so far as to take them over the threshold of the institutional imperatives they face themselves.
Yeah.
But once we do it, perhaps I'm over-optimistic, but once we do it, I think it will grow I like quoting the scene from When Harry Met Sally, when the woman says, "I'll have what she's having." When people see it, they'll say, "Yep, that's what it is." And I will also confidentially send you an extraordinary documentary that has been made. It was made a couple of years ago. It has not yet been released and will not be probably for another year or more. And it was of a citizen jury held in Michigan.
Right.
During COVID, and it was about COVID.
Right.
And it is, I found, completely extraordinary because so I think it's 30 people. They are selected in a random representative way, which means that they keep picking randomly until they get roughly the right number of women and old people and young people and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And of course, as you would expect, it produces every hue of political ideology, and you have quite a few people there who are against vaccine mandates, against mask mandates. They don't talk about much about lockdown from memory. And then there are people who are very much in favour of that, but behind all this is their lived experience, and everyone knows someone who's been affected by this in some way. And what is just gobsmacking is that they fight with each other, they get angry with each other, and it isn't that they end up compromising wildly. They do compromise. They compromise far more than our system. There's nothing in it for you to compromise if you're the opposition. So you don't compromise. But I don't want to tell you that it's all beer and Skittles and everyone learns to live happily ever after. They go through these storms of disagreement and anger, and they push through. And at the end of it, for the last 5-10 minutes, at the end of this documentary, they're basically all in tears with how much respect they have for the people they disagree with. Wow. And that's what everyone thirsts for. Because we know that we're not so fucking flash. We know that there's more to life than what's in our heads. And we're desperate to meet people who are represented to us in our media, wherever we get it from, as the fruitcakes on the other side, and the knaves and the idiots and the people who are after your money, or your child or your ideology or something. We're desperate to believe that that's not the case. And if you survey people about are they in favour of democracy, then an increasing number of people say no. I mean, it's still a minority. It's still a very substantial minority. It's still clearly a clear minority. But what they're saying no to is the freak show they can see, and they've got a good reason for saying that can't possibly be the way this place should run. And what you see of these 30 people is there's nobody who's not a Democrat. There's nobody who isn't a fully indoctrinated, rusted on person who will be stuck in the coffin and will die, a person who wants to be a Democrat. And so we are just passing up, it isn't that hard. We all want this democracy to work. And again, I mentioned the psychiatrist. We're on the psychiatrist's couch, and we want this thing to work. And it can work. It's almost there, but we've got the wrong mechanisms. And we have to pay attention to modest, thoughtful changes, which you check out, and some of them don't work as well as you thought they would, and others work better. We have to do that rather than indulging ourselves in our own self-righteousness, our own omniscience, our own list of values, and just forget it. Not interested. Forget the whole thing.
Thank you. That's been two meaty things there, Nicholas.
Good. Well, I'll send you. Now the deal is, I can send you. I've got a private link that I can let you watch this on, And if you get lots of people into the room as you watch it, that's fine. But you can't send it around to other people or they'll know about it back home. But what I can do, and I might get the editor of our recording, is I can take some stuff from the trailer of which just shows you some of this, and it's really quite something.
Yeah. Wow. And what do you with the citizens jury? I think what you're saying. I want to check what I'm understanding what you're saying here. Like, we need to sort of demonstrate and prove this any way we can, and then it's getting to that Harry Met Sally moment where it might become more institutionalized.
Oh well, no. What I've already started to do. I've written a paper, and I'll send it to you. It was written up by Martin Wolf in the Financial Times. I've written a paper arguing that we should philanthropically fund this and crowdfund this, and then you just get it there, and you go from there. So that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I don't. I mean, it is the case that the people in Parliament have the power, but it's an open system and people vote. And if you've been around politics, you know that come election time, oppositions and other politicians look around for what they can offer that's different. And so you need to be in the game. You are placed there. You stay there, and you then campaign around that. You don't go and the art of it. And this is where I think a lot of people who are advocating sortition, they think parliamentarians are where you go if you have an idea for public policy. They think that Parliament is a kind of clearinghouse for good ideas. It is not. It's a log rolling, vote counting institution, and it's quite remarkable how easy it is for politicians to flatter people by nodding their head and listening and believing even themselves that they're sort of having a good open-minded conversation. But a business person would never go into a negotiation with another business person without asking what do they want to get out of it. And that's not what people do with politicians. They think that if they go with a great case to a politician, that the politician will do something about it. And there's a marvelous story about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who at the end of a meeting said, "Well, gentlemen, you've persuaded me you're right." And they said, "Well, when are you going to do something about it?" And he said, "Well, I just said you persuaded me you're right. Now you have to make me do it." Politicians are busy people. They're trying to balance a lot of things. It's not an easy job. And this business of being a clearinghouse for ideas, well, they do that in their spare time. That's not that's not really, that's not what gets them up in the morning. I've worked for two of Australia's best politicians, and it didn't get them up in the morning. They would prefer good policy to bad policy, but they I won't say loved politics because they also hated it, but that was what their minds were full of. Their mind is full of, okay, so that person's screwing me. I want to get this legislation up. I've got to go and talk to that union. Maybe I'll talk to the company as well. And that's where their head's at.
Well, thinking with the I think one of the things I was thinking back to the initial evaluations we did of, I think, first the two recent citizens juries. I think you would have been chair at the time, the first two citizens juries in South Australia, and how they were really hard experiences for some. I think it's only about the design of the experience, but some of them were. It was still the case, I think, in those that if you had a louder voice and if you could read and write, you were at a distinct advantage.
Absolutely,
And how do you, I think some of our conclusions from that, they had people co-writing a report at the end of it. We know how hard co-write. And I think there's sort of that, how do you get that, the nuances of that experience right so everyone can kind of participate in that?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I've got some thoughts on that as well. They're not actually, they go to some other issues, but I mean, that's why, if you think about citizen juries, I don't think we have got far beyond some people thinking, hey, this is a good idea. I want a citizen jury branch of government. And so one of the things that jumps out at me is that the House of Commons, the House of Representatives has had a few hundred years to develop its own methods, its own traditions, its own systems.
Yeah, right.
And so that's what we have to think about.
Yeah.
That's what we have to think about with citizen juries. We just haven't done any of that.
Yes.
And you know, when the founding fathers in America, and they were all founding fathers, I'm afraid, when they designed the American Constitution, I mean, it was a brilliant piece of work, but boy, what a train wreck. I mean, the Electoral College, they took 38 votes on the floor of the House of Representatives to get their third president. 38 votes. It was a tremendous mess because it's so hard. So these things are, you know, you have to come up with ideas and then do them and then watch them and then finesse them that's very, very hard. So we have to realise that it's as if we've invented some new internal combustion engine, and it has to compete against the one we've got, which has had the last 100 years and about $1 trillion of research and development done.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way before. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Easy to sort of knock it off and overlook it, but you've got to, it needs its own development curve.
Very good.
That's been incredibly useful for me, Nicholas.
Good. Well, there's a bunch of more things we can talk about, but let's not do it now. We can do it again if you like,
Sure.
because one of the things we didn't talk about is what that might, or these kinds of considerations in an institutional context outside of politics, where it's not representativeness, it's about the capacity to get stuff done, capacity to understand from different points of view. There are lots of things to talk about. So if you want to, we can do it again, but no great need to. But it's been fun.
Good. No, I think I've got what I need for this piece of work.
Good.
And yeah, useful for you. I'm worried that I've not been a good enough guest on your podcast.
No, you've been great. I love you're unafraid of silence. I was admiring it all the way. Very good. I'm sorry for my listeners, possibly, but that's really good.
You've got an editor.
What's that? What's that?
You said you've got an editor. You can take those bits out.
No reason to take them out.
No. Well, I think you've got to think, right? You've got to have time to
that's right.
reflect and
Exactly.
That's if you
No question.
the whole time.
Yeah. No, I'll let people enjoy the silences.
Enjoy the silence. Okay.
And if they won't enjoy them, they'll have to suffer through them, won't they?
All right. Thanks so much.
Right. Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.